The way the whole story goes, the legend as it is we come from 5 generations of distilling tradition. My wife's great-great-great-great-grandmother, imported from Germany, settled in Missouri in the early 1800s. She built a still and started a company. So she passed that down to every subsequent generation after her. In the 1920s, there was a little bit of a social and economic change as far as alcohol is concerned in the United States. We call that prohibition. Now, it didn't stop the family from making their hooch, just made them a little bit more careful. Well, one day, the patriarch, one of his customers, decided he'd gotten a bad deal, so he reported him to the feds. So here come the revenuers up the long driveway to the farmhouse, going to shut down the operation and take everyone to jail. Now, what these revenuers didn't know is that Fritz, the man in charge, was a very careful guy. So he had built a false floor inside of one of his barns, and underneath that floor he had his entire operation laid out. On top of that floor, he'd gone out and he'd bought the meanest mule that money could buy. So these 2 revenuers come up to this barn and kick open this door in their arrogance and really their ignorance. And at that point, they had to fight a 700-pound, mean Missouri mule. And within 2 minutes, one man was dragging the other one down the road, and they never came back. So we're called the Mean Mule Distilling Company because on that day, only one thing could save those 5 generations of distilling tradition. Now, at the time, they were making a lot of corn whiskeys, fruit brandies, these sorts of things. Agave really wasn't something that they knew about or had tried. And so when we decided to relaunch the family brand in 2015, much to the chagrin of all of the grandparents, and go legit, we wanted to do something that had never been done before in the United States, and that's agave. Yeah, so agave's been a passion of mine for a long time. I've always been fascinated with mezcal, tequila, bacanora, raicilla, and it was kind of a pet project of mine. And so when I had the opportunity to kind of launch this on my own, obviously there's some things that happen in the background. No one learns this by accident, right? And so in my attempts to learn, agave just became one of those things that was harder to make than anything else. And it just kind of became an obsession for me, right? How do I make something that is the same quality as these beautiful spirits that we're getting out of Mexico? And so what became a question became an obsession, and what became an obsession eventually had to go from hobby to legit. And there was no other route for us at that point, just because it was the only thing that took all of my attention all at once. And so we decided to use agave in the United States, and it's been an adventure ever since. No, my background is in engineering. I did large-scale machine and manufacturing design for various car plants in the United States. A couple of my machines are out at Tesla. A couple of my machines are in a few Nissan plants. I've got a widget that's pretty much in every Nissan plant in the world. Did a lot for GM and Ford. And so I was an engineer that just designed machines. And so one of the interesting parts about Mean Mule is I actually designed all of our equipment, all of our distillation equipment. And at one point, it became such an obsession. One of my bosses walked into the shop where we were building machines at like 10 o'clock at night, and I told him I was going to work late. He didn't know that I was going to be building stills in the shop. And so he walks in, and there's all this equipment laid out. I'm building all this stuff, and he was like, "Man, what are you doing?" I was like, "Hey, look, side project, this is what I'm doing." And it was some big stuff. And he was like, "Fine, just bring me a bottle." I said, "Okay, done, not a problem." So Mexico, oh gosh, man, there's 2 ecosystems for agave going on right now, right? You have the tequila manufacturers that are typically, they either have their own fields, which is 5 years for one crop. That's a lot of lead time, right? Or the tequila distilleries are buying from coyotes that are selling agave from their own fields. And so if you've ever been to Jalisco, if you've ever been to Almatan or the town of Tequila, like every inch of the entire place, whether it be on the side of the highway, the medians on the highway, everything's covered in agave, right? Because there's such an agave boom right now. So that ecosystem becomes ripe for larger American and international companies to abuse it, right? So what's happened is you've had a lot of these celebrity brands move in, and in order to get a hold of the quality agave, the quality crop, they just pay more because they can, right? They have a ton of investment behind them, so they're just like, hey, instead of paying this typical like $5 a plant, $6 a plant that has been typical for agave peñas in the past, they're like, tell you what, we're going to spend $70 a plant just to get the quality ingredients and to get this off the ground. Well, so then the coyotes, being obviously businessmen, they're like, well, if we can sell this for $70 a plant, we're just going to sell it for $70 a plant. So then they go to the legacy brands in Mexico and they say, hey, new price is $70 a plant. They're like, man, we can't afford that, right? So what we're actually seeing is a lot of American investment going into these celebrity brands, going into tequila, that are actually putting all of the legacy brands in a place where they have to make some pretty tough choices, right? And so the crazy thing about agave is there's, 3,600 brands in the States right now, roughly, tequila brands, 105 distilleries. So a lot of distilleries in Mexico now they're just like money brands, right? All they do is produce 30, 40 brands. It's all the same product for various brands here in the States. And so I find that very dishonest, right? Being a producer of some sort of a product here in the United States, because at the end of the day, like if you're not putting your heart and soul into what you're making, and that's what you give to the world, then what's the point, right? All you're doing is just buying a product, selling a product, and then you're putting everyone else out of business. That's a problem. And so one of the things we decided very early on for Me and Mule is that we were not going to be a part of that ecosystem. We were not going to be a part of the ecosystem where agave is grown for distilleries and then sold to distilleries. We were going to find agave that was not a part of that. So we found one manufacturer that typically manufactures like various nectars, like nectar that you would get in a bottle in the United States, right? And so we said, hey, we want to purchase agave from you. It's really hard to get the whole peña across the border, so like let's work on some sort of a processed raw organic that we can get across the border. And then, because there's a lot of really weird import laws for what can cross the border, right? And something that is processed and organic at the same time can cross without a ton of stipulations, right? Without a ton of licenses. And so typical process for like, if we were to go down and buy all the peñas and drive the peñas across, I would have to show up at one of the major import places for the USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture. Have to drop off the truck with them for a week. They'd have to look at all the agaves. They'd have to take a couple out and check for various microbes, these kinds of things, bugs that aren't allowed in the United States. And then a week later, they would give it back to me, and then I could drive it to wherever I'm going. Right? Well, for a peña, you just don't have that amount of time. Right? It sits in the back of the truck, and the heat starts to rot. That's a problem. So this company that was not in the tequila ecosystem whatsoever, they said, yeah, okay, let's work on a product together that we can sell you. And so we import that from them, and then we take the fermentation process from there. So they break down the peñas, they pull the sugars out of the peñas, and then what they give us is a roasted liquefied product, basically. Right, so we've got 4 stills that are always being like remade in some way, shape, or form. The reason I'm giggling is because we started off with 3 stripping stills and 1 spirit still. They're each 110 gallons. The stripping stills operate 24/7. And so we went from 3 stripping stills and a spirit still to 2 stripping stills and then a spirit and gin still. Right, we'll talk about agave gin here in a second, but this is kind of us leading into it. So then the 2 stripping stills had to do the work of 3 stripping stills. So then we built a continuous still out of those 2. So then we had 2 continuous stills that were running all the time for stripping. And so we created this this kind of design really hasn't been done before. We just kind of developed our own continuous still for these 2. And so then those started running 24/7 and then 7 days a week. And then that gave us enough low wines for us to use the spirit still and the gin still. And it was a really interesting process. People are funny. They don't typically want to work 24 hours a day and 7 days a week, right? It's strange thing about people. They want a work-life balance. They want their own lives. I get it. That's fine. So distillation's a funny game in that you have basically 8 hours to work with, right? You have to be able to fill the stills, turn it on, let it heat up, make all your cuts, and turn it off by the time 8 hours is done. Right? So the system we developed, at least for the stripping portion, was a system where a lot of energy is lost in the system, because what you're doing is you're boiling a lot of liquid. There's all that energy that goes into boiling the liquid, and then you have to cool the liquid. So it's energy in to boil it, energy in to cool it. Well, I thought to myself, well, we have something that we want to make hot. We have something we want to make cold. So what if we used the incoming liquid that's cold to cool the stuff that's coming out that's making it hot? And then, so it converts itself, so that way the energy in and the energy out is saved. So we built this continuous setup where the incoming fermentation cools the outgoing spirit. And so then we're left with something that has like 40-50% energy savings on that. Plus it runs 24/7. And so it's a really cool system now. We've done some wild things. And it's all just a weird brainchild that's always changing. So it's pretty wild. You know, I would say 80% of what we do is education. A lot of people don't know what agave is, right? They assume it's some sort of a cactus, or if anything, right? So I would say probably 80% of what we do at my company is educating people on what agave is, right? And if you can make the connection, saying, hey, you know, we're sister spirits to tequila and mezcal, but we're not tequila and mezcal, because what we do is a little bit different. Obviously, the other side of that is, you know, we want to be respectful of the traditions that come out of Mexico. Those are not our traditions. And so we want to leave those where they're at, right? We're not these things, and we don't want to take credit for the amazing work that's going on there. What we're trying to do is define what agave spirits look like and taste like in the United States. And so it's something that we can point to, similar product, right? As you would say, like, you know, an Irish whiskey versus a bourbon, right? You're like, okay, well, they're both made with grain, right? And if you had to make that designation nowadays, if we were the first people to make a whiskey in the United States, but you couldn't use the word whiskey, you know, how do you make that designation? And so it's been a really interesting journey thus far. There's been some definite ways not to do it, you know. I obviously do not take credit for the culture that's not yours. Be respectful, and then just define what it looks like here. So that's what we're doing.